Hey guys, so I've been wanting to do this video for a while. I know a few people have been requesting it, quite a lot recently actually. And this will be basically my video of how I usually host maps. Some of these will be kind of obvious, others will be the way I personally do it. And because of it, this video isn't quite a how to host a map guide and more of how I personally organize them, how I keep them going, and tips and tricks I recommend for people when hosting their own maps. Number one, honestly, before I even start this, is be realistic above all else when it comes to what you want to get done and following you currently have. If you have 100 subscribers, chances are you won't be able to get a 30-part fully animated map done in 2 months. It's probably just not going to happen. Try to measure interest ahead of time and see who might be interested in your song and your idea. I've had certain maps planned for over a year that I've yet to host, either because interest just isn't quite there, or I feel like I don't have a strong enough following for it to be completed in, a good amount of time. The next step is basically have a song or concept in mind. Sometimes this can take weeks or months depending on your thought process. For me, it usually takes a few months for me to get a solid idea and even longer to write the script and get all the design set. Even if you don't have a script yet, at least write down the concept and which song you'll be using. But with that, it's actually important to check first to make sure the same song and concept hasn't been used together before. Obviously, different songs can be used, different concepts can be used, and sometimes they're used together. But it's a good idea just to avoid making your idea too similar to someone else's that has already been done. Next step is to decide what kind of map it will be. PMV, AMV, mix of both, 3D, 2D. There's a lot of different ways you can do it, and they'll all require different skill levels and skill sets. Because of the nature of them, you might attract more people for PMV maps since they don't require as much time normally. But each map has their own style, and each one fits differently depending on what you do. I usually choose based on mood of the song and the style that I want. For more story-driven maps, I tend to use AMV for the more varied and realistic movement. But for faster and more stylized, I use PMV just basically because it can allow for jerkier, faster movement, more interesting poses, and just from there, more interesting editing styles. As a personal choice, I usually write down a summary of the map so people can understand the concept. If it's a story driven map, I usually summarize what it's about, especially if people haven't read the original material in a while, which from most of the fan base seems to be everyone. And so it's especially important if you're hosting an AU map that it really explains how it deviates from the series. And if it is scriptless or an anything map, just be sure to state your expectations of what the mood is like for the map so people can actually understand what you're going for. From there, one of the most important parts is deciding on a due date. Depending on the type of map, you can theoretically make the time given as long or as short as you want. As a general rule, I usually give my PMV maps a minimum of 2 weeks, but that's usually for the simpler or less intense color palette ones that I tend to host that has very basic backgrounds, very basic movements. And from there, my AMV maps a minimum of 4 weeks to 8 weeks typically. You can easily shorten or extend as much as you want, though. Although it is important to consider if you yourself would be able to finish a part in the time given. 24 to 72-hour maps are great, but it is important to consider what you're asking of your participants. Each map is different. You can possibly finish in that amount of time, but it is important to hold to your standards in what you would expect from other people. On the other end, please be cautious about giving too much time. I personally find that around the 2 month mark, some people may become unreliable or just uninterested as they kind of draw away from the map. The original hype has kind of gone down. Also, consider that people will drop, so the more time given, the longer it will take for it to get done. Kind of tied together with that, designs that you're using. I'm the type that tend to make a little more detailed designs. I try to make them simpler depending on if I'm doing an AMV or PMV map. But it honestly kind of is up to you in the end. Simpler designs are better, but sometimes I usually prefer the aesthetic of slightly more detailed designs. So I may be going against the grain by saying do whatever you want. Just make sure that is doable and that you aren't asking too much, such as giving a character a bunch of stripes and asking them to get a fully animated part done in a week. It's good to consider what you're asking of your participants. Moving on from that is communication. I usually create a Discord for every map I create in order to make things easier since YouTube is notably unreliable with comments and notifications. People I typically require to join the Discord after being given a part, so if they do not join, they are not able to keep it. This is what my map servers typically look like. All of the general chat includes off topic discussion, anything that you wouldn't include in the actual map creating process. Although the intros channel specifically for people to give information that would be important, such as their name, the YouTube link, the role, if they're just spectating, things like that. Typically, people won't be allowed access to the server before filling this out, so this ensures they won't have people spamming you or asking for parts where they're not supposed to. Participants is basically self explanatory. It's where I list all the participants' Discord tags, put their due dates, and write out when they last gave a work in progress. This is honestly one of the most important channels I have just because it helps me keep track of who has been in contact and who has not. Resources are just all of the links to scripts, designs, concepts. It's just an easy access way. It includes whips like finished questions, those are all self explanatory. Going on to rules, I'll be using my Hawkfrost AU map deck as an example for how something like this can be formatted, although it will be different for everybody. This is just a basic example. I use similar format for almost all my maps. I usually put the summary of the map first, followed by the due dates and the rules for extensions, just because usually people have the hardest time keeping up with that. So I like to put that first on the document. Now, onto the rules themselves. I'll be going through the most basic ones I include in some way for all my maps, and then the more specific ones that may be optional or situational depending on the map. The first one I explained earlier is kind of choose a way of communication and make sure participants know what it is. I typically use Discord, but it's honestly up to you. That is what most people use, but there might be others that I'm not aware of. It's good to keep in contact and make sure people have an easy way. Discord is easy to join, so it works for a lot of people. This one may not be as important, but it's good to specify the size of the canvas you're using. It can depend wildly on the map, as maps like Rory have not traditional canvas size. But the typical one is usually 1920 by 1080. But there are other ones you can look into. Especially for PMV maps, it's good to specify if your map includes lyrics. If no, just state it plainly. If it does, it's a good idea to give details as to the font type, color, style, etc. If the lyrics are included but participants are given free reign, it's good to say that too, just to make sure they know and don't ask about it. Next basic one is to allow people to use watermarks. This could include programs like FlipClip, their names in the corner as credit. Usually, I do not allow it, partially because I think it is a little distracting, but I also tend to give credit to people near the end and edit it myself just so it all kind of looks uniform. But it's up to you. From there, it's a good idea to lay out the expectations for the type of map. This is one of the most important rules, and it's good to make sure you lay out the expectations so people don't go into it thinking that they can or can't do something based on what you say. If it's AMV, give examples for how animated it should be. If it's fully animated, limited animation, things like that. If PMV, it's good to state how much movement is required. You can be as detailed as you want, but depending on the type of song, it may be faster paced, slower paced, and it's good to specify. Same as above, is kind of laying out expectations for the type of skill or experience that is required. You may require a person to be familiar with frame by frame or experience with backgrounds or certain movements. It's honestly all going to depend on what kind of map, but just laying out the expectations of skill level is a good idea. And especially if it's beginner friendly, it's a good idea to state that as well. Another basic one is, does your map require shading? Usually with story driven maps, I usually require this, but if it's faster paced, it's not really necessary. I just think it's a good idea to specify just to keep everything kind of flowing together well. Along with flowing together well, state if your map requires a specific color palette, a theme, if you want to follow, just so everything kind of goes together well. You will have more space, if you want to include more details on your document, that's up to you. If it's a very specific color palette, it's a good idea to go into detail, but keeping things simple is usually best. So even just having, a document where you just list every color palette and the meanings, or even provide examples. Reference images are really nice, but it's honestly going to depend on where your map is based, what it's based on. So real images, drawn images, it's going to be up to you. Finally, and it's only just a formality that I like to give, but it's a good idea to tell people what will happen if rules are not followed. This kind of gives you a fallback in case someone wants to argue against what is stated. So just saying if you required certain thing to happen in the script and someone does not want to include that, it is technically in the rules, but it's honestly up to you how far you want to go with this. If you need people to follow the script to a T, that's basically where you're gonna go from there. Going back to the expectations and the due dates, it's going to be different for every single map. For me, I require that work in progresses usually be shown weekly or every other week. If one is not shown, there are no responses given within 72 hours. I usually drop the person from the map. Unfortunately, this is something you have to accept going into it. There will be people who drop contact, who don't want to respond to you, who respond late. It's just important to set up those expectations ahead of time so that you know exactly what you're getting into. Please be sure, to make sure you specify how long the extensions are, when they can be given, and especially what people need to be doing in order to get an extension. Typically, I say the part needs to have some progress done before getting an extension. Depending on how long the map was given, like if they had a month due date and by the 3rd week they barely have anything done, usually that's the point where I decide to drop a person from that map. Finally, I'm gonna go into some of the specific questions I've been asked, either from friends or participants or even people on YouTube who have posted asking me about these things. If you have any more specific questions, you can ask me in the comments. But from here, best way to make announcements, ask for updates. Honestly, part of it is just knowing what you wanna get done and recognizing what can or can't get done. Usually I have a schedule set, once a week or once every 2 weeks, I'll have a date in which I'll ask. Keep notes on people when they last kept in contact. It's a very good idea just to keep organized. If people don't follow what you're asking them, it's fair to give them a warning, just say, "Hey, I need you to keep in contact," or "I need this," but also set boundaries saying, if you don't get in contact within this amount of time, then you will be dropped from the map. It's good to set clear boundaries. So if you want something done, you just have to be very, very clear, either in the rules or just directly. Script writing tips, I honestly don't have much. My ideas typically come while listening to a song, so I usually get the idea from the song first. So it honestly comes down to that. Cutting the parts, it honestly will depend on the length of the song, how many parts I want to have, and how long I want those parts to be. Like I said, typically, 6 to 10 seconds is average, I find, but it will change depending on the part. Some people have all parts the same length, some people don't. From there, I usually try to match it up with the lyrics so they're all around the same part. The next question is, how do you figure out when it's best to host one? If you should have a certain amount of followers to have the best chance. Honestly, I mean, it is easy to say that the more followers you have, the best chance of getting people, but it can honestly depend on your idea. My Firestar map, the first map I ever hosted, got way more attention than my some of my current Dawn of the Clans maps, and I honestly just think that's because more well-known characters just are going to get more attention in general. I think it's a good idea to hold off on your more intense or detailed experience projects for later when you do have a larger following. Otherwise, keep it, short and simple just until you start to get at least somewhat of a solid following, or at least, some more friends or mutuals in the community that can kind of help you out. And you can kind of lean on each other. That's what I typically do with my group of friends. We typically join each other's maps. So that's something as well. So in the end, I'm hoping this was somewhat helpful. I know I didn't cover everything that people might want to know, but if you have any specific questions, like I said, you can post in the comments below. That's probably the best place to do it so everyone can see the answer. If you have any specific questions that you don't want to post publicly, feel free to DM me. My Discord is in the description. And otherwise, I look forward to posting more map parts. Thanks, guys.